You know that moment when you notice someone else's success and feel it hit your body before your mind catches up? A tightness in your chest, a subtle drop in your stomach. Comparison doesn't usually announce itself, it just shows up, already doing damage. And somehow, no matter who you're measuring yourself against, the conclusion always seems to be the same. You're trailing behind. The important thing isn't pushing that feeling away, it's noticing that it's happening at all. Because once you notice it, something shifts. The thought stops being invisible. Instead of being the comparison, you're observing it. And that alone creates a little space. You don't have to argue with it or fix it. Just acknowledging, oh, this is comparison, loosens its grip more than forcing yourself to think positive ever could. A lot of the time, comparison isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, polite even. It whispers things like, they're doing better, you should be further along by now. And you agree without realizing you were asked. But when you slow down enough to hear the whisper, you realize it's just a thought passing through, not a conclusion of your worth. And these moments show up everywhere. A friend's promotion, someone else's relationship, a highlight reel scrolling past your eyes at exactly the wrong time. And yes, it stings because it taps into very basic human needs: validation, safety, reassurance that you're not wasting your life. Feeling that sting doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It just means you're paying attention. What matters is what happens next. Most of us tense up, mentally brace, and spiral forward into stories about what we should be doing. But there's another option. Pause long enough to feel where that comparison lives in your body. Your chest, your shoulders, your jaw. Staying with that sensation for just a moment interrupts the usual mental loop. Think of comparison like a cloud drifting across the sky. You notice it, you feel its shadow, but you don't chase it or try to break it apart. The sky doesn't panic because a cloud showed up, and neither do you. There's nothing to correct, nothing to catch up on, just awareness. Comparison survives on stories. I'm behind. They have what I don't. Must be nice. These stories feel convincing because they repeat themselves, not because they're true. When you notice a story forming, you don't need to fight it. Just recognize that it's happening. That simple act turns a story from a command into background noise. Your body often knows before your mind does. Shoulders tightening, breath getting shallow. That physical sign is an early warning system. When you pay attention to it instead of pushing through, the spiral slows down. The comparison becomes something you're experiencing, not something controlling you. And here's the part most people miss. Comparison doesn't actually help you improve. It drains energy without offering direction. It leaves residue, heaviness, self-doubt, tension, and then pretends it was useful. Seeing that clearly is powerful because once you notice the cost, you get a choice. There's no deadline on this. Comparison will keep showing up, that's normal. But every time you catch it early, pause and breathe instead of reacting. You'll weaken the habit. You're not trying to eliminate comparing yourself to others. You're learning not to let it run the show. And that shift doesn't come from effort, it comes from presence. When you notice yourself comparing, pause for a second. Hear the story your mind is telling, the mental movie of someone else's success or life choices. Framing your own is inadequate. It's never really about them. It's about your mind hunting for enough or not enough. Observing that story quietly is already a form of gentle resistance. Picture a small garden inside your head. Every thought is a seed. Some seeds grow wild, choking the others, like comparison, envy, and doubt. You don't need to rip them out or panic about them. Just notice which ones are sprouting. Over time, awareness tilts the garden towards calm, not competition. Comparison often rides on subtle feelings: a flicker of jealousy, a quiet anxiety, a hum of frustration. Sometimes you don't even notice it until it threads through your whole day. But if you sit with the sensation, no fixing, no explaining, you see its rise and fall like waves on a shore. Being aware is small but powerful freedom. Social media amplifies this habit. Highlight reels, endless scrolling, it sharpens the reflex, yet even without it, your mind compares constantly. One key is to notice the difference between what's real and what's imagined. The life you see online is a story, not a fact. Seeing that can soften the punch. Gratitude works quietly too. Not lists, not checkboxes, but small lived-in moments. The sun on your skin, the warmth of a cup, a sound that makes you smile. These little anchors remind your mind the richness is already there, without competing or comparing. Slowly, the cup fills up on its own. Comparing yourself to others costs something: energy, focus, and ease. Naming that cost without trying to fix it shifts your mind. Thoughts become optional, not orders. Feeling them doesn't mean surrendering. Awareness itself starts to loosen their grip. Watch for patterns. Certain people, moments, triggers bring comparison to the surface. Recognizing them isn't control, it's observation. Each time you notice, you can choose: step in or step back. That tiny choice changes your relationship with your own thoughts. Comparison often hides as fear: fear of missing out, fear of being behind, fear of not measuring up. Beneath it all is wanting reassurance that you're good enough. Meeting the fear gently, without racing to self correct, interrupts the spiral. You don't erase it, you acknowledge it. That alone softens the urgency. Think of your mind like a pond. Comparison is a ripple. Panic amplifies it, and observation lets it dissipate. Gentle ripples over time calm the surface. Presence, quiet, constant awareness, is stronger than effort or judgment. You feel it before you see it. This is subtle, ongoing practice. Comparing yourself will return. That's normal. Each pause, each notice, each breath builds a quieter, gentler inner space. Perfection isn't the goal. Presence is. And that presence starts right now, exactly where you are. Sometimes the hardest part isn't noticing the comparisons. It's noticing them without immediately turning on yourself. That tightening in your chest or that quiet thought saying you're behind often arrives with a reflexive layer of shame, as if thinking about it means you've already failed. But comparison isn't a flaw in your character, it's a pattern your mind learned in response to the world around you. Seeing it without judgment doesn't excuse it, it softens it. And that softening is usually where change quietly begins. What makes comparison tricky is how subtle it can be. It doesn't always arrive as a loud thought. Sometimes it's just a shift in mood, or a slight drop in energy, or a sense of contraction. Your mind might immediately narrate it, telling you what it means, but the feeling usually comes first. Bringing attention to that feeling rather than building the story around it changes the experience. The moment you notice the sensation itself, the thought loses some of its grip. What often follows comparing yourself to others is an urge to fix yourself, to work harder, improve faster, to close the gap you think you've identified. That impulse feels responsible, even virtuous. But it's worth noticing how quickly the reflection turns into pressure. Doing nothing, even briefly, can almost feel irresponsible, as if pausing means falling further behind. And yet, that pause is often the only moment when the reflex loosens instead of tightening. Comparison to other people also has a strange way of warping time. You look at someone else's progress and suddenly feel late, as if there's a schedule you missed without realizing it existed. But timelines aren't shared, they just look that way from the outside. When you remember that your path has always unfolded at its own pace, something settles. Not because the comparison disappears, but because it no longer gets to define urgency. Sometimes it helps to introduce a bit of humor into the moment. You can imagine the comparing voice as an overly dramatic commentator narrating your life like it's a competitive sport. Giving it a slightly absurd tone doesn't make it vanish, but it breaks the spell. It reminds you that the thoughts don't have authority just because they're loud. Distance doesn't require force, sometimes it just requires perspective. Another shift happens when you bring your attention back to what you actually know, instead of what you're imagining about others. Your lived experiences, which you've handled, learned, survived, or created, are real. They don't need comparison to be valid. When your focus returns to what you've directly lived, imagined benchmarks lose their power. Confidence often returns quietly, without needing proof. Not all comparison is negative. Sometimes it's tangled with genuine desire, seeing a life or path and feeling drawn toward it. The key is noticing how that desire feels in your body. Does it energize you or does it collapse you inward? That sensation offers guidance long before your mind decides what it should mean. Learning to read that signal gives you choice instead of compulsion. It can also help to redefine success in smaller, more immediate terms. Comparison thrives in abstraction. big milestones, distant outcomes, and imagined futures. Grounding yourself in concrete moments disrupts that pattern. A finished task, a moment of peace, a quiet decision you honored, these aren't consolation prizes. They're evidence of a life actually being lived. A gentle question can sometimes cut through the loop. What is this comparison costing me right now? Usually the answer isn't growth or clarity, it's energy, focus, or ease. Simply noticing that cost reframes the moment. You don't need to argue with the thought or replace it with something positive. Seeing the trade-off is often enough to loosen your grip. You'll continue to compare yourself, not because you suck, but because you're human. What changes over time isn't whether it shows up, but how quickly you recognize it and how softly you respond. Each moment of acknowledgement adds to a different kind of momentum. There's no finish line here, just an ongoing practice of returning to yourself. And that return, again and again, is where the quiet freedom lives. Comparison doesn't only appear when you're looking outward, it often lives in how you quietly evaluate yourself throughout the day. The mental checklist, the subtle shoulds, the sense that you're falling short without knowing exactly why. That voice can feel so familiar that it fades into the background. But once you notice it as comparison, not truth, something changes. It stops sounding like guidance and starts sounding like habit. You may begin to see how predictable comparing yourself really is. It shows up when things are quiet, when you're waiting, when your energy drops in the evening, not because something is wrong, but because your mind dislikes open space. Comparison gives it something to chew on. Seeing that pattern doesn't make it vanish, but it removes the sense that it's personal. Comparing yourself to others all the time also flattens the natural rhythm of life. It makes growth look linear and success look constant, even though lived experience is anything but. Real change happens in starts and stops, and detours and pauses. Remembering that reality restores a sense of proportion. It doesn't lower your standards, it grounds them. Connection plays a role here too. Real connection, not curated images or silent measuring, has a way of dissolving comparison. Being present with someone without tracking who's ahead or behind reminds you that life isn't a ranking system. It's a shared experience, unfolding differently for everyone involved. Over time, something subtle begins to change. Instead of looking outward for proof that you're doing okay, you start noticing your own signals. Effort, honesty, follow through, rest. These aren't flashy metrics, but they're reliable. Trust grows quietly when you stop outsourcing your sense of worth. Comparison doesn't need to be defeated or erased. It will visit again, as habits do. What shifts is your relationship to it. Less urgency, less belief, more space. Each time you notice it without collapsing into the story, you reinforce a different way of being. And gradually, life feels less like something to measure and more like something to inhabit. At some point, you might notice a subtle shift. You still compare yourself, but it no longer feels compulsory. The thought shows up, makes its case, and you realize you don't actually have to follow it anywhere. That realization isn't dramatic or triumphant, it's almost ordinary. But it changes the relationship. You're no longer inside the reflex, you're aware of it. Over time, success begins to feel less abstract. Instead of measuring yourself against imagined milestones, you become more aware of what you're actually living. Conversations you've had, effort you've given, moments you've shown up for. You might even notice a bit of humor in how predictable the mind can be once you've stepped back. That lightness doesn't dismiss the feeling. It just reminds you that thoughts are commentary, not commands. Comparison doesn't disappear, and it doesn't need to. It returns because habits do. What changes is how much space it takes up. Each time you notice it without reacting, something softens, gradually and quietly. And when it shows up again tomorrow, or later today, that's not a step backward. It's just another moment to return to yourself, with nothing to fix and nothing to prove. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe and leave your thoughts below. I'll see you in the next one.